My name is Rob. I am the community and events lead here at Power to Fly, joining from New York City. Very excited for today's talk on neurodiversity and really supporting neurodiversity in the workplace. Today's discussion is part of what we're calling our Employer Conversation Series, DEI, all year long. Here at Power to Fly, we love all things DEI and we really want to keep these conversations going. So we really want to offer these forums for employers, DEI professionals, HR professionals, talent professionals to really learn from subject matter experts, also learn from each other, and also for individual contributors, heads of ERGs to also digest some very valuable information and take that back to your organization. So very excited for today's talk. And I just wanted to share a quote that I think is really valuable that we've shared on some other events. It's actually from McKinsey and Company. And the quote is, "This is an unbelievable opportunity to remake culture. It's rare in a leader's lifetime to have such a clean drop for reshaping how to run the place." And they're really talking about in that quote, we're at this really interesting time here where we're coming out of this pandemic very slowly, but we're inching out. We have this very valuable time now to reshape the workplace as we see fit and really make it a place that's more diverse, more inclusive, more dedicated to well-being and mental health as well. So really using this time to see what is that workplace of the future going to be, whether that's hybrid, remote, in-person, some combination of all those kind of things. And that's what we really hope to get from this conversation and the many other conversations that we're doing here at Power to Fly. And we actually have daily conversations like this. So if you're not already a Power to Fly member, please complete your profile on Power to Fly so we can better know what events to help invite you to. And otherwise, you can check out our newsletters and all that to find out what events we host every day. And last, before I turn it over to my colleague Arushi to run us through a poll, just to want to remind everyone, please remain on mute for the talk. I see some people turning their cameras on, so that's okay. You can turn your camera on. We want this to be nice, collaborative event, but please remain on mute. And we will take some time for some questions later, in which we'll allow some folks to come off of mute or use the Q&A box as well. We also have plenty of questions that were written in. And once again, today's conversation is being recorded, so no need to take notes. You will get that recording tomorrow with all of the great tips that we're going to be learning today and insights. And with that, Arushi, why don't I turn it over to you for this fun icebreaker that you have planned?
Thanks, Rob. Hi, everyone. My name is Arushi, and I'm the summit coordinator here at Power to Fly. I'm extremely thrilled to be having this discussion with y'all today. So I'm just going to share a Slido poll with everyone. So we want to just know why you are here. If you could use, just use this QR code, which you see on the screen, or log on to slido.com. You don't need to register or do anything. It's very intuitive. You have to put the code 416701. I'll give it a couple of seconds so everyone can log on. And once we're done, I'll share the question with everyone. Lovely. I'm going to move on, and I know Paloma, my coworker, would have shared it in the chat with everyone, but I just want to know what's happening here? Technical difficulties. Okay, what motivated you to join us today? Just one of the 4 options. You can even select multiple options, and we'll get a live feed. Curious to learn more? Me too. Amazing. 35 responses, 37, great. We've got a lot of leaders, a lot of curiosity in the crowd. That's awesome. Great, everyone's just curious. I love that. 52, great. We have 84 participants and about 53 responses, 55, great, everyone's answering. Lovely. I'm going to shut it at 60. That's a great number. And I'll move on to the next question. Is your organization currently doing enough to support neurodiversity? No, that's unfortunate. This is why we need these conversations. No is still a lead. That is really sad. All right, looks like we've reached a conclusion. Okay, still going. 55. Awesome. I'll keep this going live throughout the entire webinar today. So if you want to answer at your leisure, please feel free to do so. But Rob, it's over to you now with our introductions. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. That was very interesting. Thank you, everyone, for taking that poll there. Great way to start everything off. And I'd love to introduce our first subject matter expert today. And their name is Sydney Elaine Butler. They are an HR professional and accessibility activist, speaker, and implementer. And Sydney is a 2020 graduate from Sheridan College from the honors of Bachelor of Business Administration Human Resources program. As a neurodiverse individual and an HR professional, their professional purpose is to ensure everyone has the opportunity to be successful regardless of barriers in their way. Sydney has written AODA policies, practices, and procedures for a nonprofit and made sure they were compliant and capable of training their employees to support clients with disabilities. They hosted a workshop for their team for Disability Pride Month to help educate them and understand the importance of accessibility and accommodation for all. Sydney believes educating and speaking about these things is essential as part of their duty to both of their communities within which they identify so strongly. Thank you so much for being here, Sydney, and I'm going to turn things over to you, and then we'll bring in our other speakers in just a bit.
Thank you for that introduction. So actually I have that on one of my slides of the bio we already gave it, so I'm not going to go over it again, but today's agenda, if you could go back to the agenda slide, please. So today we'll be talking about a bit of an introduction of what neurodiversity is in the workplace, recruitment and empowering neurodiverse talent, steps towards an inclusive workplace, how you can start today, online training, and an article I was also featured in that also touches on the importance of neurodiversity in the workplace, and then we have a Q&A with the other speakers as well. Next slide. We can skip this because Rob just spoke about it. So a bit of an introduction. So definition of neurodiversity. It's the variation and differences in neurological structure and function that exist among human beings, especially when being viewed as normal and natural rather than pathological. As we know, neurodiversity is a huge topic right now, but even beyond that, most organizations, as you guys just actually answered in the Slido, a lot of you companies, you guys think neurodiversity is being not as focused much in companies, although diversity and inclusion is such a hot topic right now, and especially during the pandemic, we realized that diversity and inclusion is very important. We're still neglecting neurodiversity, which is a huge part of neurodiversity. And then also it's the most untapped labor market. And I actually have a statistic. So 43% of neurodivergent people felt discouraged from applying for a job because of the application process, which I'll talk a bit more in depth shortly. Next slide, please. So again, and I want to talk a bit about the benefits. So I think a lot of people, when they think about the benefits and when they want to hear about the benefits, they want to hear about the benefits as a whole. And the neurodiverse people can do for the organization as a whole. But again, it's an individual approach. Just like if you were neurotypical, so it's neurodivergent and neurotypical. And so with neurodivergent individuals, just like the neurotypical employee counterparts, everyone has their own individual strengths and weaknesses. So you have to really focus on what the person has to offer as themselves. So there is numerous benefits of having neurodiverse talent in the workplace. People with autism often bring new perspectives to the organization because they can see things from a different lens that the organization usually would overlook. For myself included, some neurodiverse individuals like to dedicate their time to one specific interest or project. A benefit for employers are looking for specialists that focus on a specific area of focus. So, for example, I focus on accessibility, so I'm allowed and I can add that to the companies, and other people have other interests that they focus on and they research and they focus and they hone their skills on that they can show to the company, as well as some employees like doing repetitive tasks and for like automated work that would be good for the repetition. Again, like I stated before, each employee should be considered for the unique experiences and contributions they offer as an individual. A lot of people, everyone's a big bag of what they have to offer, and there are different experiences and different strengths and weaknesses. And so it's really important to focus on those. Next slide, please. So the person asked if I can show the definition of neurodiversity again. So if you go back to the first slide. Yes, this one. So here's the definition. It's the variation in differences in neurological structure and function that exist among human beings, especially when viewed as normal and natural rather than pathological. I hope that clarifies. So now we're going to talk a bit about neurodiverse talent and recruitment. So it starts with an accessible recruitment, interviewing, hiring process. A lot of the hiring process and recruitment and interviewing is not currently accessible. You just want to understand barriers and then removing barriers in the hiring process. So right before the pandemic, there was could be a lot of physical barriers in the actual office and in the space that people were being interviewed. However, now there's still barriers, and the biggest barrier that comes to mind is editorial barriers. And editorial barriers refers to someone's perception or a view on people with disabilities, and I'm thinking that they couldn't do this job for X reasons, when that's not the case. If they have the qualifications, they should be able to do the job just fine. They might need a bit more accommodation, but they still should be qualified for the position. A lot of websites, the company needs to have the website accessible, and it has to be up to WCAG guidelines to ensure accessibility. I can share a link also that shows, so you go on the website and it shows you all the ways that the company's website currently is accessible and ways to improve it if it's not accessible, and the tips and tricks. So what is WCAG? It's so the websites have guidelines now for accessibility, and so you have to make sure your website is accessible, and you can have different functions. So when you're creating your website or modifying your website when you post jobs, it's important that it's compliant with that. Yes, I believe these slides will be available after. And so also accommodation statement for candidates. So actually the company I was just working at recently, they did not have accommodation statements, and some companies do not, but it's important to have accommodation statements for candidates. So these accommodation statements basically state that the company allows and provides accommodation as needed for candidates. So saying that you have a specialist, if you're a specialist, HR specialist, or a manager, it's important to have in your email or when you send of the interview request, or even when you're on the phone with them, or even directly on the job posting when you post them to your website. It's important to state if you need accommodation at any point during the process, including the recruitment, interviewing, pre-screening phone calls, anytime you need accommodation, you can let the employer know and they will provide you with the information. It's important to modify job posting to make sure they're more accessible and use more inclusive language. Make it clear that your company welcomes neurodiverse talent. I think a lot of companies miss out on that because neurodiverse individuals want to know that they're welcome, and then sometimes there's a clear message saying that they're not welcome. So it's important to be very transparent and make sure they know that they are welcome, and also modify questions. For example, an example I always use is, what is your weakness? Someone that is neurodivergent might take that literally and be like, this is my weakness. And when the question's actually asked, because I have HR training and I ask these questions in my interviews, and it actually means, how can you turn your weakness into a strength? I only know that, I didn't know that prior to being in HR, because I just thought they just want to know my weakness and that's it. But that's not actually what the question is asking. It's also, you can also send the questions ahead of time. This allows people to prepare, because no one likes to be put on the spot. And you want to know the person. It's not, an interview shouldn't be, when you ask the questions on the spot, you're making that, it's kind of like you're putting them on the spot and making them think on their feet. But if you have the questions ahead of time, they can better prepare and better show how they're applicable for the job and qualified for the job. That's what the purpose of an interview is, to see if they're qualified for the job. So it doesn't matter if you should send the questions ahead of time so they have better time to prepare and fully fill out why they're qualified for the position. Next slide, please. So let's talk about empowering neurodiverse talent. So first and foremost, have a conversation with your neurodiverse employee. I think a lot of people think this one size fits all kind of glove, and that's not the case. It's very important to have the conversation with the individual that it works at your company, because they know what they need, and because everyone's needs are different, again, like I stated, and I'm going to keep saying because it's very important. So have a conversation with them and learn how they want to be empowered and what they need to succeed. Listen intently to neurodiverse employees when they speak. Sometimes employers, they want to do what's best, but they sometimes think it's difficult to accommodate or to listen accordingly, or just they think they want the cheapest way to handle the problem. However, that's not always efficient, because if you ignore the problem, so like if you don't have the person directly, it's going to become more expensive actually. Also evaluating the culture towards neurodiverse employees by asking them how they feel about the culture and how they feel that they're included, and if they enjoy the culture that exists currently, or what can you do to improve your culture to make them feel more engaged and included. And accommodate based on what the employee says they need, not what you assume. So that's very important, because a lot of employees know what they need. For example, they say, I need a checklist to know all my duties I have to do for the day or the week or however long they need it. It's important to listen to them and give them the checklist they need. Give them the resources they need to be successful, not the resources you think they need to be successful. If they need different tools that if your other employee doesn't need, but they need it to be successful in their position and their tasks they have to do for their job, give them what they need. I already say this quote, it's in both slides and the next slide too, because I think it's very important. It's what one person needs to succeed might be very different for a different person needs to succeed. So we're all different. And like, for example, I need a little bit more time. And then also, I think with accommodation and empowering, I think it's important to recognize that some days the accommodation needs might be more or less, depending on how they're feeling that day and what's, I personally get triggers. So then sometimes I might be more triggered. I might need more flex time. And it depends, and you have to check in with your employees and see how they're feeling and go from there. Next slide, please. So steps towards an inclusive workplace. So it's important to design your work environment with inclusion, thorough principles of universal design. Design choices should be made that do not create barriers for people with disabilities. The next step would be removing these barriers. If you don't already, so it's important to, if you have a new structure or you're reevaluating your structure, you have to include these in the design and be like, okay, how can I get rid of these barriers and do not create these barriers when I'm creating this? However, sometimes there is still going to be barriers as you create this. And so if you realize once you create the structure, that there's barriers, it's important to remove these barriers. And there's physical barriers, as I said, that's like infrastructure and like elevators or stairs that the person can't get up the stairs if they use a wheelchair, or non-physical, which goes editorial. It starts with editorial barriers, including bias, discrimination, and fears around neurodiversity. And many organizations adopt inflexible hiring, retention, and training practices. And I think a lot of companies, there's a second tradition. In tradition, people always talk about, oh, well, this is the way we've always done it. And then I think the pandemic taught us that we have to look at new ways of handling things. And that's important to be like, okay, that clearly wasn't working. Now it's a lot of jobs, they want people to come back to the office because the pandemic is getting better and things like that. But then you're alienating a whole market that was available to work during the pandemic because it could work from home, be more flexible. So it's important to learn these new practices and move forward with them and not just neglect them once the pandemic's over. Accommodate any remaining needs that were not met by designing or removing the barriers. So sometimes you remove the barriers, you design it appropriately, but it's still a person that needs to be accommodated in a different way that you didn't think of, because there's always ways everyone needs to be accommodated differently. So even though you look at, and then sometimes you look at your structure and you say, okay, I did all these things, X, Y, and Z, but the person needs to be accommodated for the person they are, and how accommodation needs, as I've mentioned before, varies. So next slide, please. So now I'm going to list off some resources. So the first one is autism in the workplace training, and I did the training a couple months ago, and it was very beneficial because it was more from an autistic point of view. A lot of trainings, I feel, for companies, they look at it from the company to the autistic, to autism employees, but this one was from an employee that is autistic and wants to be in the workplace and their standpoint and how to better accommodate them in the workplace. So it was very unique because it lends that we usually don't see in trainings. Also, Leaves & Co. Is a new training. It's it focuses, I'm based in Ontario, Canada, and it's focusing right now on Ontario, but they're expanding right now, they're still developing. But it's a very good training. I did it last month, actually. And so it's a paid program. So you can, it's a paid program for organizations to purchase and to ensure disability training in the workplace. You can reach out to Max Lieberman, who I believe is also on the call, for more details, or contact via the website. I'll post that in the chat shortly. It educates all organizations about disability through online inclusive learning programs to create more accessible and inclusive work environments. And it's a very unique way because a lot of organizations and trainings, they're either in person, a person just speaking at you, but with this program, it's online, it's a virtual program, and includes interactive animation videos and has questions for each module, and it's being updated quarterly, and it's in-depth training rather than just the basic older training that Ontarians usually get, or the American equivalent. It really goes in depth into inappropriate language, and there's more topics being added all the time. And then also the article is an article I was featured in a couple months ago, and for Autism Acceptance Month, and it talks about the benefits of neurodiversity from an HR standpoint. Next slide. So I want to say this quote: accessibility allows us to tap into everyone's potential. I think when people think of accessibility, they think, oh, it's just for people with disabilities, but it impacts everyone, because when we're accessible, everyone's included, and everyone feels more included, and everyone has more an equal accessibility and accommodation. It's all about leveling the playing field. I think a lot of people think, oh, if someone's accommodated, and if something's accessible, it's only accessible to people with disabilities. But there's a lot of accessibility features. We have accessibility features on our phone that we don't even realize that were created for people with disabilities, that other people that don't have disabilities. My friends use them, and I'm like, that's for accessibility purposes. But people like the night mode, for example. I think a lot of people think, oh, night mode looks better than the white screen and is better. And so it's like, that's an accessibility feature, because the white light is harsh on some people's eyes. And so it's just important to realize that accessibility and accommodation just allows everyone to be on the same playing field. And especially, I think, because accommodation, I don't know, I think school, a lot of people get accommodation, they would get more time to do a test. And so people say more time, more access. But that's not the case. It's just they need that more time to succeed and do their best they can. So that's why it's important. Next slide. And thank you.
Thank you, Sydney. And this is why these conversations are so valuable, because I had not thought of dark mode or night mode in that way. So this is just very enlightening to me. And I think so much of what you said, although we're speaking about neurodiversity today, that kind of one solution fits all approach that people often take to other kinds of diversity. I mean, it really, can be so true for so many different types of diversity, or other things that we're approaching in the office. And kind of going back to that quote that I shared at the beginning, this is really a time that we can transform the office to make it a more diverse place for everyone.
I agree.
Thank you. And so we're going to bring Sydney back into the conversation in just a bit, but I want to introduce our other two subject matter experts. And we're going to go then into some questions that we had submitted, pre-submitted, and then there's already some questions in the chat. So that is wonderful. So first, I want to introduce Marcy. And Marcy is a respected autistic author, international ambassador, and inspirational community builder who's best known for her writings found in the well-received blog and book Everyday Asperger's. And she is a senior manager of DEI at Ultranauts, who we're a big fan of here at Power to Fly, a fully remote engineering firm with an autistic hiring initiative. They've been featured in the New York Times, and she's working on largely architecting a universal design approach to workplace inclusion. And I'm sure we're going to hear more from Marcy as well. And our other speaker is Khushbu, and Khushbu is deeply passionate about diversity and inclusion and is a neurodiversity specialist and a transformational leader on a mission to advocate for and help provide access to high quality services for neurodivergent children and adults. Khushbu aims to make a meaningful impact in the world through education, empowerment, authentic engagement, and unbridled compassion. So thank you both so much for being here. And just kind of wanted to, I gave those bios, but I'd love to kind of just hear a little bit more from you both about your own personal journeys as well. And, also kind of what, made you so passionate about this topic as well. So Marcy, why don't we start with you?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here and joining us today. And thank you for this platform and for the opportunity to speak aloud with my vocal cords. Those of us on the autism spectrum, we present in all different ways. Non-speakers have just as much relevant and important things to say as well. So I want to honor them as well and honor that 35% of neurodivergent individuals that are out there. Fantastic. That's wonderful to see. And it's so correct that, where are we in this neurodiversity conversation? We have a lot of learning and growth to do, but as my CEO at Ultranauts always says, there's lots of growing pains, but we remain agile and flexible and continually in improving those processes and creating that psychological and safe and brave space for team members. Real briefly about me, you can find a lot about me on my website, and I'll put it in the chat later, which is myspectrumsuite.com. Suite is in like an office building, SUITE. You can Google Marcel Champy, my name, and LinkedIn articles, and a bunch pops up there. And also you can check out Life Guides for Autistics. It's neuroguides.org, where I'm a co-executive there. So I won't spend a lot of time talking about my background, except to let you know that I was a late age diagnosed female on the autism spectrum, diagnosed about 10 years ago. And that led me to an online journey where I ended up writing 3 blogs and over 500,000 words. And because of that, connected with people all over the world who identify as being autistic or similar neurological profile. I myself am not only on the autism spectrum, I am also dyslexic. I have dyspraxia, many traits of ADHD, waiting a diagnosis there, been diagnosed gifted intellect, PTSD, generalized anxiety disorder, and so forth. And all of those make me a neurodivergent individual. All of us here today are under the neurodiversity umbrella. We're all part of neurodiversity. It's one of the only, if not the only, underrepresented group that includes everybody on the planet. We all have unique ways we process and perceive and present. And I'm very happy to be here. My other role is with Ultranauts, Inc. I am their senior manager, as was mentioned in DEI, and we have grown from 10 employees when I first came to over 100. We're hiring every month. We're an engineering firm, completely 100% remote from day one, all onshore. And we have 75% of our employees are autistic. And I was largely responsible for building the recruitment process, helping to manage the well-being of the community, advocating, mediating, and I do outreach as well. And I'm very proud to say that we actually, in an engineering firm, have more non-males than males. And also our numbers are way above for the national average with LGBTQIA representation and our Black and Brown friends and colleagues. So we're doing some great work. So we've learned a lot of things along the way. I've had over 3,000 hours of study into this topic and had over 10,000 conversations with people, as I think I might have mentioned, around the world related to this. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Marcy. That's wonderful. We've had the good fortune to speak with the CEO of Ultranauts as well over email. So I know you all are doing some amazing work there. And I love Khushbu, if you want to introduce yourself a little bit more and tell us a bit more about your journey as well.
Sure. Thank you, Rob and Arushi and Marcy and Sydney. It's been such an honor to be welcome in this conversation. My story is a little bit interesting because I actually had a lot of neurodiverse family members growing up. And so at a very young age, I had decided that regardless of what I do, I wanted to help people with disabilities. I first started down the pre-med route and quickly struggled with that path, and then decided I wanted to pivot to psychology. And in 2011, I was working part-time as a behavior therapist. And one of my clients said his first words on the day that I had received an acceptance letter to a PhD program in clinical psych. And that was the moment that I decided that I really want to support people with neurodiverse conditions, and completely transitioned my life towards that goal. And then at some point around the time I was 30 years old, I got really burnt out and really depressed and discovered that I had severe ADHD and that I had been living with it my whole life. And at the time, I was also having a lot of employment struggles myself. So I decided to pivot to working with supporting neurodiverse people in the workplace. I work as a program manager at Neurodiversity Pathways. I actually put the links here in the chat. And we work on two levels. So on one side, we support with providing career readiness training and a career launch program to empower neurodiverse job seekers who are underemployed or unemployed to gain the skills and be confident and self-determined to follow their path and achieve their goals. And on the other side, we actually provide trainings to organizations on how to be more neuro-inclusive. So we provide that through awareness sessions on neurodiversity, because I believe that no real change is possible without foundational awareness on a large scale of what neurodiversity is. And also by providing inclusive hiring programs as well that employers can look into, so they can figure out if they are interested in creating a neurodiverse or neuro-inclusive workplace, on how to go about doing that. So we've also created Neurodiversity's normal website. If you guys want to check that out, it's a really cool way to check your own neurodivergence and figure out what are some of your strengths and what are some things that might technically be considered neurodiverse that you might not have been aware of. We believe that neurodiversity is normal, and it's a normal part of diversity, and it should definitely be celebrated and accepted. So just a little bit about me. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Marcy. Thanks, Khushbu, for the introduction. And, neurodiversity is normal because all of us have such different experiences and perspectives and upbringing that's what shaped our brains. And that's basically neurodiversity, right? Your brain is different than my brain. Here we are, we're having this conversation. So I actually want to go back to Marcy with a pre-submitted question that we had. And someone has asked, I have a few dyslexic and ADD sales reps, would love to know how to best support them in an organization.
Such a huge question. So I recently finished a manuscript that's about 100,000 words on this topic. Wow. So I usually try to speak with the present moment and what comes into my mind, because I could go in so many directions with those ADHD traits. I can just squirrel all over the place. So for right now, if you were to ask me that question, I would say to assume competence. Do not make the assumptions, get to know the person, research as much as you can about the topic of neurodiversity, being a neurodivergent individual, in this case, an ADHDer. There's Delivered from Distractions. There's some excellent YouTubes out there. Learn about the condition, learn about the whole person, and recognize that, yes, they're an ADHDer and there's wonderful challenges and strengths to having ADHD, but there's also a lot of other things about the person that they bring to the workplace. For example, I'm not just a neurodivergent, but I'm a mother and I'm a daughter and I'm an artist. And treat them with hold a space for their dignity, hold a space for respecting them, and most importantly, don't create this inferior superior construct where they are less than or deserving of more help than someone else. We all are equal, keeping that in mind, not creating more segregation. And asking, as Sydney said so well, asking the individual, what is it that you need? And is there anything that you need from me? Or I'd like to learn more about your lived experience, and I'd like to hear your story. Let's focus on the person, their individuality, and their story, and not their condition or their diagnoses. And it's also important to remember my middle son's on the autism spectrum, and my youngest is an ADHDer. It's also important to remember some people are proudly neurodivergent, and it's part of their identity. I cannot separate myself from being autistic. I am autistic. It's the way my brain's wired. But there are some individuals, like my middle son is 22. That's not a part of who he brings to the workplace. That is his own private information that he's diagnosed on the spectrum. And he has given me permission to share it publicly, but he doesn't want to bring it into the workplace. And so we need to respect people's dignity again. And that's one of the reasons that I advocate, like Sydney did, for universal design inclusivity. If we're creating systems that are naturally providing and fostering psychological safety and opportunities to bring ourselves to work and to reach our full potential with accessibility and, for example, having font a certain way that accommodates dyslexics and colors that accommodate dyslexics, and an agenda ahead of time that helps to accommodate ADHDers, and flex work hours that helps many people who are neurodivergent, then we're not forcing people to disclose that they have a disability or condition unless they want to and choose to. And in fact, in recent surveys and research, 30% of us in the United States identify with having at least one disability. And of those people, only 3.2% feel comfortable disclosing a disability. 3.2%. And the main reason cited was because of invisible disabilities, like being a neurodivergent, where it's not always obvious to the onlooker. So it's important that we talk about how to create a place of belonging for everyone. And in doing so, we create that place of belonging for the ADHDer and the dyslexics and the dyspraxics and the people with Tourette's and so forth.
Lovely answer and stats over there, Marcy. It is mind-baffling how we that's the question that I think a lot of people also had on pre-submitted questions, is how do you create that space for having this conversation with, let's say, your employer or your HR manager, and do you declare that you identify with a disability or do you not? So maybe Khushbu, you want to help us with that question. How do we, as HR leaders and managers, maybe create that space for our employees in the workplace?
I mean, I would say that the biggest and most important thing that's pertinent for any organization or any team is awareness about neurodiversity. I think everyone needs to understand what neurodiversity is and just be accepting of people's differences and just be inclusive, because being different is not a bad thing, right? It adds more financial benefits to organizations. It creates a more psychologically safe workspace. It allows people to show up to work as their whole selves, right? And like Marcy says, it helps them to hold space for their dignity, which is such an important thing. I think that awareness is really, really important as the world is changing and more people are learning about neurodiversity. It's important to foster that knowledge. And what I would say is the biggest thing is also to understand that the accommodations that neurodiverse people need or require are not huge things. They're not things that require complete policy overhaul. More often than not, it's just being a little bit more flexible, right? A little bit more agile in your processes and just making sure that you're communicating clearly, that you're not using vague language, that you're assessing people based on their strengths and what they bring to the workplace rather than what makes them different or unique, right? So that's what I would say.
That's great. Thank you so much. And I hopefully during this interesting time that we have all found ourselves in, that kind of flexibility and ability to pivot has grown in businesses and in individual leaders as well. And actually, one more question from our pre-submitted, and then we'll go to some of the live questions that have been coming in. So Marcy, maybe we'll go back to you, and then Kushbu and Sydney, if you'd like to answer as well. But people are really wondering, what is the first step, that a company could make to becoming more inclusive of neurodiverse people? And they're also talking a little bit about a big company versus a small company. So maybe we can also talk about what can a small company with relatively few resources do to really make their workplace more open for neurodiverse people.
Would you like me to answer first?
Sure, that would be great.
So I actually am a consultant for Fortune 500 companies, and we work with them with consultancy and training and job coaching as well. One of the unique things we do with job coaching is we're shifting the paradigm. Some of the autism at work programs or neurodiversity at work programs don't assume competence and assign autistic people a job coach and don't assign other people job coaches. What we do at our organization, at Ultranauts Inc., particularly, and in our other coaching that we offer to corporations, is our coaches are neurodivergent. And they're not just for neurodivergent individuals, they're for everyone. And we need to stop making the assumptions that some people need more assistance than others. If anything, the global health climate, the epidemic has taught us that we all need help. In fact, rates before the pandemic were at 40% for loneliness, and they're only even higher now, as we can imagine. So we all need that assistance. Going back to your question, what are the initial things you can do? Tap into the neurodivergent culture, learn the language. 81% of autistic people prefer on the spectrum or autistic to with autism. So learn the language of the culture like you would any other culture. Come from a social model, not a medical pathological deficit model lens. Once we start looking at ADHDers and those with similar neurological profiles as a culture and as a people and not as a diagnosis and a deficit, then we can start applying the same things we do to other cultures like the LGBTQIA community, and how we would go about including them. For example, we wouldn't have a training team. If you can imagine, if you identify as a female out there, we wouldn't have a team of all men coming into the workplace to tell us what it feels like and what it's like to be a woman in the workplace. But those are the things that are happening with neurodivergent individuals, where trainers are coming in who don't have neurodivergent representation in the team. So bring in the neurodivergent voice, whatever that looks like, bring in the non-speakers, bring in the speakers that use their vocal cords, and learn about the culture. Tap into one key thought leader, such as myself, And I know hundreds and hundreds of more. And then you have this network of people who can bring their narratives and their stories and learn about what it's like firsthand to be neurodivergent. I also would say start with putting someone who's a neurodivergent into an HR role, whether that's starting them out as a community manager part-time. I started off as a community manager and a recruiter part-time as an independent contractor, 10 hours a week. And as Cindy mentioned earlier, many of us have this potential to focus, an extreme amount of focus in a topic of interest. And because of that, I am now where I am today because I dedicated so much time to this company and had so much loyalty to the company. So bring in that neurodivergent, you're not only getting the culture and the cultural lens and the networking and the connections, but you're also more than likely going to get somebody who wants to show and prove that they can do the work, because like so many underrepresented and underserved community members, those in the neurodivergent community want to show, yes, look, we are of value. And I hope we get to the point someday where we don't have to feel that way, where we don't have to prove and show that we are worthy, and that people recognize just because we might present and process and think and cope differently, that we're just as worthy, just as special, just as needing of love and acceptance and belonging as anyone else on the planet.
Thank you. Wonderful. Had a question live in the chat, and I wanted to ask this one. So any of our three subject matter experts, whoever would like to answer this one, or if you'd all like to, or multiple of you would like to answer, that is great. And this question is, since depression is part of the neurodiversity umbrella, how do you feel when employers write employees up for a quote unquote negative attitude, or not being positive, or not displaying customer friendly attitudes? And the performance improvement plan is to be more positive and smile more. So does anyone have any advice for a company where maybe that's their current approach?
I think a lot of people don't even know that depression is part of the neurodiverse spectrum. I know people that are depressed themselves. Some of them don't even much identify. They like, yes, I have depression and I'm depressed, but I don't identify as neurodiverse. So I think it's important, again, just have that conversation with an employee. It all goes back to the conversation and understanding. You have to communicate with them. Why are they acting this way and having that conversation with them and explaining to them how that plays a role in the organization. So really an understanding, okay, this is why they're doing it, and this is why it needs to be fixed, and really understanding, giving the individual approach. I think and understanding that, because and even people that aren't depressed or clinically depressed, diagnosed with depression, that everyone has bad days and can be upset. But just I think the problem comes when it's like performance, the PIP, performance evaluation plan, and understanding that they can. And then think also, like, a lot of people think that if you are depressed, they're poor performers, they are low performers. They can be high performers in other regards. So focus on what their strengths are and how in their job duties are, and figure out what they can, if they can focus more on those tasks that don't, and help them with that instead of focusing them on these tasks. If they need to interact with the clients or anyone, have that predisposition and be smiling and be positive. So communicate with them with that, and have a mutual understanding for why the organization wants to do that and why the employee is doing that. I think it's important just to have that conversation and start breaking down those barriers. And I think it goes back to what I said before, the adversarial bias, because I think a lot of people think, oh, the person's depressed, they must always be, and they must look that certain way because they're depressed, but there may be other factors that influence that as well. So it's important to understand all the factors.
That's great. Yeah, please go.
I just wanted to speak to this. Being someone who has had ADHD struggles while being depressed and being burnt out, I've had to have this conversation with my supervisors in the past. And I'm not going to lie, there's been times where I've shared this with my supervisor or my manager, and the response has been, well, everyone has bad days and we need you to meet your billable hours. And there's been supervisors and managers that have been really supportive. You know, my current supervisor is here, his name is Ranga Jayaraman. And I've told him the things that I've struggled with, and that individual, approach is so, so, so important. So Sydney, thank you so much for bringing that up. I think that when we have a PIP that's super standard and it's non-changeable and it's rigid in its processes, we're really doing a disservice to the person that it's supposed to serve, right? Yes, things need to get done. Yes, there's rules and processes for a reason. But when you sit down with someone and you ask them, hey, is this something that's personal or is this something that's caused due to your work here? That's number one. Number two, if it is caused by something in the workplace, how can we figure out a solution that works for everyone, right? Let's talk about what it is. And if it is something that's really not matching with what you're able to do, or it's not connected to the strengths that you bring to the table, maybe let's look at your job description and think about what are some things that we can maybe do a little bit differently. Let's tweak this a bit to match what you bring to the table and really so that you can feel psychologically safe in this workplace. And if it is a personal thing, I mean, we've noticed with this whole pandemic, with childcare and all the other stresses that people have in their lives, that they have to sort of put aside when they come to work. Maybe that person needs a day off, right? Maybe that person needs a few days off. Maybe that person needs a week off. And that's an allowance that you can make based on, self-care need, right? And I think that as we're moving and transforming our organizations to be inclusive of everyone, I think it's really important to acknowledge that self-care is a huge thing. And when people are burnt out, a lot of times, all they need is just someone to say, hey, it's okay. You're human. We've all been there. And what can I do to help? Right? And sort of individualizing whatever that response is. So telling someone to smile more is not okay. And I don't think anyone should say that ever in a response to a PIP feedback. Also, another thing that people forget is when you get a PIP, that should not be the first time you're being given feedback on something. That's really, really crucial. You should have been if whoever you work with is supposed to have talked to you about what is on the PIP long before it gets to the PIP process. So that's just one other thing I wanted to point out. But yes, that's all.
Lovely. Thank you, Coach Boo and Sydney, for that. And how you mentioned about how we're noticing now during the pandemic, everyone has their own needs and, everyone has their own form of self-care and, daycare mothers. There's so many different roles that we play in our daily life. And I think the question now is, now that the companies are thinking about going into a hybrid model or, return to workforce, how can we sort of accommodate neurodiversity then? Because in a remote work situation, it works better to have your sort of downtime, your flex time, or the environment that you're surrounded with isn't overstimulating. So you can control over what time you take your break, the color of your walls, for example, or simple things like this is my safe space. So in that realm, how do you sort of, as an employer, how can you support your workforce, or how can you fight for them in having this remote environment, even though companies are forcing to have this, let's say 3-day, 2-day kind of policy or hybrid work model? I'll let any one of the subject matter expert take this. Marcy, do you want to go, and then we can go roundtable discussion?
Sure. I'll speak briefly on it. I did put an article in the chat as some of the things we do at Ultranauts. Number one, find organizations that are working like Ultranauts that are 100% remote and see that the success they're having, as was mentioned, we were featured in the New York Times. Our loneliness rate, when the nationwide average was 40%, pre-COVID, our rate was 10%, and post-COVID, it's 5% to feel lonely at work. So remote teams can work, and they can work in connecting people as well. point to different strategies you can use in the remote workplace, such as Trello boards and Slack and other online venues, Discord, so that the company can stay connected. Talk about ways that you can bring the community together so they become a stronger, unified group. We have every other week, we have team forums, which is paid time for every employee who wants to join. It's led by a neurodivergent individual, professional, and we talk about how hard it is right now with our social justice climate and global health climate and political climate. And we have honest, open conversations and support one another. We have online team meetings. We have check-ins. It's rethinking, it's thinking outside the box, which is the innovative thinking that a lot of us bring to the workplace, whether neurodivergent or not. And it's reinventing the workplace. It's this opportunity to have this blank canvas. One of the reasons I am at a remote environment is because I have at least 6 coexisting pain conditions, physical disabilities. I am able to thrive and contribute so much to the organization and to the outlying society because I've been given the opportunity to work from home. 30% of us are disabled. How many of us would be able to be better contributors to our local communities and to our nation and to the world if we were granted opportunities? It's about that accessibility. It's about that inclusion. It's about that belonging. And I would also say for anybody that's venturing into remote work, there are so many great tips that you can find that people are already doing it. One is to have those handbooks about the unspoken rules and expectations. What should an email look like? What should Slack conversation look like? How frequently should we meet? A wonderful thing that we're doing at Ultranauts is we have a thing called Biodex. We had an online contest. We have monthly contests for all our employees, and then they get gift cards. Again, creating that community. And in one of our contests, someone came up with the word biodex. And now we publicize that word. And a biodex is basically a 1 to 2 page form where every new employee in onboarding fills out a little bit about themselves. Do they like public praise? Do they not prefer public praise? Would you like feedback right away? Would you like to wait a little while for feedback? If I need to pull you into a remote office room, a virtual room, do you want me to tell you at the start of the day that, I'd like to meet with you? Or would you rather know at the last minute so you don't have that anticipatory anxiety all day long? Writing these types of things down. And again, that's about bringing the person to work. And we also talk about what our strengths and challenges are. I have a very spiky profile, as all neurodivergents do. So I can write and research and synthesize and use bottom-up thinking. And I bring a lot of unique attributes, but at the same time, I have a very poor working memory. I have dyslexia, which makes it hard for me to pronounce people's names. But then again, that dyslexia has enabled me to think of all these new ways to approach life so that I can succeed and has helped me to be resilient. So including all of that and getting to know people, but again, just focus on, well, where is it working and how does it save the bottom line? Some people just want to hear about the bottom line, think of how much you're saving in space and so forth. And you're providing an opportunity for thousands, if not millions of underserved people. That's also a positive branding. You know what? We just lifted our disability numbers up from 20, or let's say 5% of our employee base are disabled. And now because we've gone remote, we're now providing job opportunities for 40% of people that identify with having disabilities. So there's all different types of approaches. Hopefully that answers some of it.
That was amazing, Marcy. Biodex, that's something I think everyone is curious to know more about, because we should have this practice in every workplace. How do people like feedback? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Do you understand how to write an email? What is required? Because Rob and I having this discussion a few days ago about having Slack best practices, because that in itself is a degree or course that one could, sort of finesse. So do you mind telling us a little more, Marcy, about biotechs? Because I feel like that's what the audience is also asking, and we also would like to know a little bit more about.
If it's not in that article that I linked, I can find the article that it is in. It might be in that article. If someone could give me a shout out and tell me, so I'm not wasting our time looking, but it might be in that. We keep it in an online forum. It is. Thank you. So it's in that article that I just posted at 12:55. Thank you, Monica. I think that's pronounced correctly. It's 1 to 2 pages, and we created a template. The recruitment team and I created a template after doing a survey of the community at work and asking what they would like to have on it. And then we put it together and asked them again, how's this look, and got their feedback. And every manager has it at the start of a project. We update them and we talk about them. And now it's used as a model in different types of DEI conversations. Thank you. Well, my number one strength finder is a learner. So that comes with pros and cons. Thank you there. Someone said they appreciate my organization.
And I was curious, we were talking a lot about remote work and its benefits, but for the people who will be going back to an in-person setting or maybe a hybrid setting, on a lot of the calls Power to Fly has had with our clients, a lot of them are getting rid of the cubicle traditional setting and moving into what people are calling hot desking or hoteling, where no one has a set place they sit, and they'll be constantly sitting in a new place each day. And I'm just curious how that system could affect someone who is neurodivergent. So I was wondering if any of our subject matter experts wanted to tackle that. Yeah, I'm just very curious about that.
I can speak to this a little, but a lot of the people that I coach, they might have temperature sensitivity or sound sensitivity, or they might like things a very specific way. I'm that way too. I really just need to be on my desk when I'm working. It's really hard for me to change things around too much because it really stresses me out. And it makes me more anxious as well. So I think that, it's okay if other people want to do this. But again, just like you would accommodate anyone in any workplace, if someone says that this is what they prefer, then having some set spaces for people who want that accommodation, it's just as simple as asking and making that change and just kind of being a little bit flexible in how you do things. That's all.
That's great. And before I worked for Power to Fly, I went from having a place where I could have all my little tchotchkes out on my desk to a place where they wanted nothing on your desk. And I found that very difficult because I wanted those, signifiers to me that I could look to throughout the day and have, my drawers and papers. Mm-hmm. So, and they were taking, going back to Sydney's original point, that one size fits all solution to everything, which certainly didn't work for everyone. I saw a question in the chat. Sorry, I lost it there. There's some chat is very active, which is great. Oh, from Blaine, who was asking, how would you address those in the workplace who might fight the changes needed for others that are neurodivergent in the workplace? So of course, this is not a scenario that we hope to see, but if people are experiencing pushback, whether it's minor or maybe if it's more caustic, how would you approach those individuals and work with those individuals?
I think, like I stated before, a lot of companies, they want to do the cheapest. And so I think someone even commented about the ROI of the return of investment on having these things in place and having accommodation in place for individuals. I think, like Khushbu mentioned, it's a lot of the things like policy development doesn't need to be done. It's just very simple things that need to be addressed and changed in order to accommodate neurodivergent individuals. And so working with them to understand what they need, because sometimes it's just a simple, little more time, or little things moved around, little changes, and then the cost of not having these things will actually be more expensive and it's important. And so if like management is like, oh, it's too expensive, showing them the cost analysis and the cost benefit, because then they manage to really care about the cost and the end line and the bottom line. And so having these conversations and talking about the importance of accommodation, and actually accommodation, like I stated in my presentation, helps everyone, and accessibility helps everyone, and it's a more cost-effective manner. And it really, because a lot of people are worried about cost and they want to do the cheapest option. So explain this is the cheaper option, and then it does help individuals, and it allows for a more productive work environment. And those who get accommodated feel more motivated and they can do their job accordingly. And then they feel, and when they're not accommodated, sometimes they kind of feel discouraged, or that, like I said, with the checklist, or like if they don't get the resources they need, they're gonna take more time. That takes up more company time to do a project or a task. And then so really understanding what they need to succeed and do it in the best way they can in the time they need to do it, instead of, if they don't have the accommodation, it could take them more time and could be more costly to do it that way. So if you just give them the accommodation, it's actually more cost effective.
Yes, we have that conversation all the time about DEI as a whole. When you look at how DEI can really help a company and their bottom line, having a more diverse workplace can bring in that additional equity, financial equity as well. Kushbu, would love to hear your opinion or thoughts on this same topic.
Yeah, definitely. I am going to sound a little bit repetitive, but I am going to say no true change can come without that awareness, right? On a large scale. And I think that every organization needs to get neurodiversity awareness training, just as we do like gender diversity training, race, right? Sexual orientation. A lot of times, many companies will put neurodiversity as their very last DEI objective. And it's the most basic form of diversity. We're all neurodiverse, like we've been saying. So I think that awareness is super, super, super important. Without that, there can be no true change. And really what I like to say to people is, if you're being inclusive and accessible to neurodiverse people, you're being inclusive and accessible to everyone. That's what it is. Being inclusive of neurodiverse people is literally just communicating more clearly, welcoming people's needs, and creating a psychologically safe culture. And I think that every workplace needs that. So if there are people who are responding negatively to that, I think the company should be asking, are these people contributing to our culture positively or not, right? And that's a simple question. And building that culture of psychological safety and acceptance, it takes time, and change is hard for everyone, I think. But with that awareness and with that knowledge about what neurodiversity is, I think that change can be possible no matter what company is, large or small.
I'd like to add a little bit, if that's okay.
Sure, go for it, please.
Thank you. So having been a manager before and worked in different settings, I would first ask, how can we support you? If I'm with their supervisor, are you feeling stressed? A lot of times managers are overworked and they have so many multiple tasks, and it might not be a people issue. It might be a time management, or not enough resources, or not enough compensation, or not enough positive reinforcement that's happening. So get to the key, use those neurodiversity best practices with the manager, model that behavior, be that role model of what true neurodiversity inclusion looks like. Also, I would focus on solutions and resources that aren't really time consuming. Research shows that training is wonderful, but also making it an option so that there's that buy-in. Someone doesn't feel forced to be there. We offer a managing stress and anxiety workshop, and people get paid to be there if they want to come. So those types of things, treating people like adults, not children, like you have to come to this and you have to learn this. Like we are here today by choice, and that makes a big difference. Well, some of us, hopefully no one's here by force. If you are, I hope you're enjoying your time. We also have started a Diversity with Dignity Roundtable, and I'm one of 5 co-founders, and we meet monthly at the end of the month, the last Wednesday of the month. And we have a free education. There's no catch, nothing to buy, no list to sign up to. So I charge you in a year. It's a free forum, Zoom forum, where we have education about this topic, and then we network and share links and share resources. So you can invite a supervisor or a manager to something like that. Also, what was said earlier about connecting with the logic and the bottom line, so important, and also connecting with the heart. Some people connect well with the heart. So sharing those stories, I put 2 links in here with webinars that are by, I'm not in either one, but I know most people in these, and I sponsored one through Ultranauts, about what it is to be a neurodivergent worker and some of the challenges and triumphs that come with that. Also, Walgreens, Randy Lewis speaks of Walgreens and their disability initiative, and he speaks of how the managers said they became better managers because of disability programs. So talking about how when we implement best practices for those that have invisible disabilities or invisible conditions, that it can help someone mold themselves to be a better manager, and we can all be better workers and better colleagues. We can always strive to learn more in that way. And then also to remember that accepting someone and accepting their difference doesn't mean that you have to like them or like their choices. It means that you respect them as a human being and you treat them with maturity. So going back to what is accepting and what is creating a place of belonging.
Very, very well said, Marcy. That there's so many things that you have dropped in that conversation. So I'm going to slowly tease apart everything that you said. Firstly, there is a question about diversity with dignity. People love that concept. Likewise, is there a way that our audience members can join this forum, especially new managers who might be, trying to be more supportive in their workplace? I see a head nod. Do you want to give us some more information there?
Sure. And thank you for the kind comments. I do have generalized anxiety disorder and post-traumatic stress. So coming to these events, no matter how much I'm prepared, it's always very nerve-wracking for me. So those comments really do help. And for those of us who like positive feedback, I mean, you can never give. I used to be a school teacher. You can never give enough hugs or positive feedback. So thank you. For people who are comfortable with that, I appreciate that. The diversity with dignity is a hashtag I came up with. And it's because of my research, and I saw that people who were part of the neurodivergent population weren't always being respected and honored, and they were being forced to disclose a disability to get basic services met. So our diversity with dignity, we really focus on that universal inclusion and how we shouldn't have to give away personal information in order to be treated like a human being and be treated with accessibility and kindness and openness. And we meet, like I said, once a month. All you have to do is reach out to me on LinkedIn, and my name's there. I'll put my full name in the chat, Marcel Champy, and I will pass it on to one of my business colleagues or one of the founders. And all we ask from you is your email so that we can send you the Zoom link. Each month you'll get an invitation. And if you ever want to be off the email list, we'll take you off. And we're also planning a Diversity with Dignity virtual summit, which will be sponsored by Ultranauts. We're going to have that in the fall of 2022, all about nothing about us without us, where we're bringing the representation of the neurodivergent voice as the leaders, as the collaborators. One thing I like to say is it's not enough to say we invited them to the table. We need to become the inviters. And if we're not the inviters, then we're not really in a position of power. We're subordinates. So we're creating an opportunity for neurodivergents to be the inviters. And for those who are neurotypical, which I always joke, most of my best friends are neurotypical. So those that are neurotypical, they can come and join us equally, and we can create this together.
Amazing. I hope you're hiring, Marcy, because there's a lot of fans that you've got out here today on Zoom, but you might get some few applications and resumes. So you better be hiring now because you've got a few applicants coming your way. But on that same note of extending, being that invitee. So, Kushbu, do you want to touch base maybe more about tools and resources that can be readily available at a workplace so that we become the invitee at the table, and we invite people to come join us and make them feel they feel like they belong in this organization?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, to sort of piggyback of what Marcy said a little bit earlier is, understand the culture of neurodiversity, right? Speak to people who are neurodiverse, hire people who are neurodiverse, create jobs that are accessible to people that are neurodiverse, and really make it so that you create a culture where you're saying to all of your employees, hey, look, we have someone in HR who's neurodiverse. We have someone who's a program manager who's neurodiverse. One of our facilitators is neurodiverse. And the more people you have that diversity, that are in key positions in the company, you're basically communicating to everyone that is accepted, that is okay, and that we're not, judging anyone based on any differences. We're seeing them as a whole human, right? We're seeing them as entire individuals that bring their whole selves to work, that they feel safe bringing their whole self to work. And I think that's really, really, really important. And also, obviously, increasing your own awareness about neurodiversity, reading books on neurodiversity, going to talks like this, right? Just asking people who are neurodiverse in your own workspace if that's something that they have disclosed to you, and saying, hey, how do you prefer to work? How do you prefer to be addressed? What is your working style? What is your learning style? If we were going to do a training, what are some things that would be helpful to you so that, we make sure that we're, taking your learning needs into consideration? And not only asking neurodiverse people, but asking everyone, and just sort of opening that door for people to feel safe, to ask for what they need, to communicate what they need, and just to feel that they are respected, acknowledged, heard, celebrated, all of the above. So that's what I would say for sure. And if you guys are interested, I'll put the links here again. At Neurodiversity Pathways, we have awareness sessions 2 times a month, every month. And we basically discuss what neurodiversity is, and also how you can be more accepting of people who have a neurodiverse condition or background, and just understanding that it's completely normal to be neurodiverse. It's the most basic form of neurodiversity. And just understanding a little bit more about that. And if anyone's interested in starting an inclusive hiring program or anything of that sort, feel free to reach out to us as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And before we wrap up today, I'd love to hear from each of our 3 subject matter experts on one final question. And that question would really be, we've heard so many great pieces of advice and so many great resources today, but if people could take away, people who are listening right now could take away just one thing from today's conversation, what do you hope that one thing would be? Sydney, since you started us off today, do you want to kick this off?
Yeah, I'll go ahead. I think I'm going to repeat what I said a million times, and it's what one person needs to succeed is what one person needs to succeed. So make sure that have the conversation with your employee and understand what they need from you to best help them succeed in their position.
Thank you. Marcy, how about you?
Thank you again for this opportunity. I'd like to read a quote from Anam Cara, which means soul friend in Gaelic, and it's by John O'Donohue. And he says, work should be an arena of possibility and real expression, a place where the soul can enjoy becoming visible and present. The rich unknown, reserved and precious within us can emerge into visible form. To me, that's what focusing on neurodiversity is. It's enabling us each to be visible and present, so that we can contribute to an organization. As Judy Singer has told me, we've had conversations of the person who coined the word neurodiversity, that neurodiversity isn't meant to create more boxes and segregate people. It's meant to provide opportunities so people can be real contributors in the world.
Fabulous. And Kushbu?
Sure, yeah. One thing that I would like to say is, I think when we look at people based on their differences, what we're really doing is we're separating ourselves from other people, right? And on one side of that, there's pride, which is great. But on the other side of that is prejudice. And I think that instead of looking at all of our differences, I think we should look at what makes us all common, the humanity in us, right? The ability for all of us to show up at work and feel that we're respected, that we're treated with dignity, that we are given the space to be heard and acknowledged. I think it just goes back to the basics. So for everyone who's here, I would say the one thing I want you to walk away with is to remember all the things that we have in common as well.
Lovely. I think dignity and respect is the words for today. And like you mentioned, and these are comments in the chat too. Neurodiversity is just another diversity, right? We talk about color, we talk about religion, different countries that we come from. So that's another diversity right there. There is one last question from Kamisia. Sorry if I've mispronounced your name, but do you have any additional resources for individuals identifying as neurodivergent, who lack community? A lot, understandably, seems targeted at the employer. So as an employee, how can we empower ourselves on a closing note today? I'll let everyone take a turn, or whoever feels confident in doing so, please go for it.
I put in different suggestions in chat there, neuroclastic.com. I know the founder, it's a not-for-profit. Tara Vance has over 400 autistic contributors, and most autistic people have at least 4 or more coexisting conditions. So if you're looking at autistic resources, you're usually finding ADHD, dyslexia, mood conditions, dyspraxia, etc. Differentbrains.org. I know Hacky, he's fantastic, another not-for-profit. I've done some podcasts there with Haley Moss, a well-known autistic. Many different resources there. ASAN is fantastic for self-advocacy and learning how to advocate for autistic people. The Art of Autism, I serve on the board there, is another resource. And if you are neurodivergent and interested in connecting with me on Facebook, I have about 3,000 people of my Facebook page that we interact and connect with each other. Most people are late age diagnosed autistic people there. And you're always more than welcome to reach out to me on LinkedIn. And I don't have time, unfortunately, for one-on-one conversations and calls anymore. I'm probably bringing on a brand new assistant, and hopefully I'll have a little more time on my hands then, but I'm always sharing resources and articles and so forth.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Marcy. Maybe the assistant might be just from the Zoom call, right? So anyone else, Sydney, Kushbu, is there anything else you want to add to this?
Yes, so I shared my LinkedIn in the chat. I can share it again after I speak. But I share a lot of resources on there, and I just shared another one that's good for helping with employment. And if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, message me anytime, feel free.
Perfect. Kushbu?
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. I think Marcy touched on all the big ones, but there's also just so many neurodiverse advocates online, on Instagram, on all of these different social media apps, Facebook, LinkedIn. Feel free to connect and talk to people. And I'm sure everyone has different resources that they're sharing on their pages. So there's a lot of information out there, but we're all here for you. If you want to reach out, ask any questions or clarify anything, feel free to reach out. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you all so much. On a closing note, we do have our Slido again for today, just the last one. So if you all can log back on, if you haven't, this is the QR code on the left-hand side of the screen, or it's slido.com. Our code is 416 701 if you want to join. And today's question is, do you feel you have more tools to support neurodiversity at your organization after today's session? We really hope that Power to Fly and our amazing panel discussion has helped you feel more empowered as an employer and as an employee. So if you can take a second or two just to answer this, it would be very helpful. But if not, we will see you again for another session very soon. We do have our summit coming up in September. It's on a different note, but we do encourage you to join us. It's on early career connections and mid-career pivots. And we will send you a link in the chat for that too. Please join us for almost every day. We have an event at Power to Fly, and it would be an honor to host all of you again. I'm going to leave this session running so that someone takes a moment to answer this, but thank you so much for joining us today. And I'll put it over to you, Rob.
Thank you. And just also a reminder, we'll be sending out the recording of today's conversation as well. We'll include a bunch of the resources that were shared today as well. We're also putting together a report on this topic, and we hope to share that also. And hopefully that's something you'll all be able to share with your employers too. So we hope you learned something today. I certainly did. Thank you all so much for your time, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. This was so well organized. I've done many of these.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Please, can
Bye-bye.
you leave this running for a bit so I can copy some of the stuff in the chat? Well, I'll just save the chat, but I want to be able to access the links. Thanks.
Sure.
No problem.
We'll also be sending an email after this session, maybe in a week, with a little take-home workbook and with some resources. So don't worry, we've got you covered for sure.
Thank you.
Is it okay if I leave, or do I need to stick around for
Oh, please go ahead and enjoy
You
the
could.
day.
Enjoy the
Everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.